Welcome, everybody, to the last talk of the Rocky Mountain RepRap Festival. Thank you all very much for coming. Anyone on the stream for watching. Everyone wave at the camera back there. You're live on YouTube. And this will be VOD'd as well for those that would like to rewatch or cannot make it to the show. So we have a great talk, great guy, Scotty. Strange Parts also runs the Electric Ranch channel, which I'm a huge fan of. I've actually been there. It's awesome. It's amazing. Obviously, most people won't get there, but just keep watching the videos. It's amazing. We also have Greg. Greg is...
I think we'll let Greg introduce himself.
Greg will introduce himself. We'll introduce. So, as always, I got to run the rest of my head cut off. I leave you with these two gentlemen.
Awesome. Thank you, Justin. Yeah, I think to start with, Greg, why don't you introduce yourself, and then I'm going to tell you why I have you up here.
Well, that's...
it wasn't intentionally ominous, but...
So my name is Greg Needell. I am I own and run a company called Rev Robotics. We're the big sponsor of FIRST and make hardware that's used for students in robotics around the world. I'm also the co-owner of Electric Ranch, so that's the fun venture that Scotty and our partners are involved in. Having fun there.
So yeah, we bought a large property up in the mountains of Colorado here, and are getting up to lots of fun shenanigans. And we've started a new channel called Electric Ranch that is the intersection of like technology and rural living. So think like autonomous snowplow robots and things like that. So
robots you can drive from the internet to help us with construction.
Yes.
So log in and use a skid steer to move dirt for us.
Yeah.
So if you want to do that.
We have not bought the skid steer yet, but we have bought a mini dumper, which is the word the Chinese use for a tank tread wheelbarrow that weighs 1,000 pounds and has like a front loader scooper on it. And we are in the process of converting that so that you can drive it over the internet. And then dealing with all of the inevitable problems of not letting you knock down the house in the process. So that's coming up soon. But the reason I've got Greg up here, we met in probably 2016 in Shenzhen, China, at what a group of us all refer to as like hacker barbecue.
Lamb Place.
Lamb Place, yes. I first went to China with Mitch Altman, who is the Johnny Appleseed of hackerspaces. He leaves a trail of hackerspaces everywhere he goes. He was the founder of NoiseBridge, which is a hackerspace I was a member of in San Francisco, where I met him. And he was the final like straw that broke the camel's back that got me to China. He every year used to, I don't think he's doing it anymore, but for 10 years led a hacker trip to China where he had a ragtag group of hackers come with him to China for 3 weeks and visit a whole bunch of hacker spaces and kind of where whoever else would have us in the process of him going and visiting his manufacturer in China. And when I got to Shenzhen, like my mind was blown. It was completely different than the stereotype I had in my head of what China was like. And I was immediately in love with everything that was happening in Shenzhen. It was brand new, like everything was new and gorgeous and modern, and totally set up for people who want to make stuff. You know, there were the world's largest electronics markets, there were factories to go visit, there was, 24-hour turnaround on PCBs costs $30 extra, It was just like this, childhood dream come true, literally. And through Mitch, I got introduced to Ian Lesnet, who runs Dangerous Prototypes and made the Bus Pirate, if you're familiar with that, which is like a cool little debugging device. And Ian had started this ragtag group of hackers through running a thing he called Hacker Camp, which was come to China for 3 days. They did 1 day of talks, 1 day of exploring the markets, and 1 day of factory tours. And what he didn't realize is that when you bring hackers to China, they just stay. Because they love it so much. And so that turned into everybody going out to dinner every night and eating lamb barbecue, Chinese barbecue on skewers, sort of shish kebab style but smaller, and drinking a lot of beer and bringing with them whatever they had done that day. So if they had found something cool in the markets, they brought that. If they had gone to a factory, they brought war stories from the factory. And so I met Greg there, who was in the process of manufacturing his very first product for Rev Robotics. Did you also go to Hacker Camp? Is that how you?
I never went to Hacker Camp. I've been in and out of China for like, I guess 18 years now. I used to do power tools, and I used to do toys and a whole bunch of other products, and I had a startup that did some LED stuff, and so I kind of went from working for companies that had massive supply chains to just having to go there myself and figure it out. And in process of figuring it out, I got connected to that same group, but I was a little less like eye-struck at what was going on because I had been there for so long. But it was fun to have someone to, at the end of the day, be able to like talk to and share stories with. And so I ended up hanging out with that group for, years, right?
Yeah,
so,
yeah, for sure.
So while Rev was being founded, there was a kind of a group that ended up being just a friend group, and we all traded stories and did shenanigans in China while we weren't trying to push startup life forward. And the interesting thing about this group is it was a very big hybrid. There was some of us who were there trying to do startup life and just make hardware happen. Other people who were just technology enthusiasts who were just there to figure out what was going on and enjoy. And it was a really interesting cross-section, and that group still exists in virtual form.
Yeah, so it was, the organizing mechanism was you emailed Ian, and then Ian would, saying that you were like coming to China and wanted to meet up with him, and he would add you to this WeChat group that had everybody in it, and then it was just kind of ad hoc from there. And Greg was one of the people that I met early on who taught me the most about manufacturing. Like I have learned more from Greg about manufacturing than I have from anybody else, which led to like, I don't know, us hanging out more. Like we would be drinking beer and I would be taking notes underneath the table and like have a half page of notes from like an evening of drinking of like how manufacturing worked.
And some of the early Strange Parts videos, I'm on the other side of the camera. Yeah. So it would be like, I'm going and doing a thing, and Scotty's like, hey, could I just come with you to your factory? Yes. So if you look closely, there's a whole bunch of like early Rev factories that
Yes. We have shot at a lot of Greg's factories, some of which he's more thrilled about than others in terms of exposing his supply chain and the vendors he's working with.
But I could tell you, having when I was doing toys years and years ago, working for another company, I would spend almost 4 months a year in China. And most of that time was very lonely because I would just go and I'd be in a remote factory and I would just do a thing, and it would just be, all right, I'm just going to do the same thing. And then when we did it on our own, it was amazing to find this community. And I think that community is a thing that everyone who's here can kind of feel, that being connected to the 3D printer community or the maker community or hacker community, the robotics community, really helps empower you and make you feel more confident about the things that you're doing. But it's like, I can tell you that we wouldn't be where we are company-wise and friendship-wise if it weren't for that whole group.
100%. I mean, I think Rev really emerged from that group in many ways, but also Strange Parts did, right? Like Strange Parts would not exist if it was not for going and drinking beer and eating barbecue with this eclectic group of people. A lot of the ideas for videos came out of barbecue, including the idea for the very first video. Like that was from a night at barbecue of someone who had came back and said, I walked back through the cell phone markets, which none of us really understood. Like we all, like the cell phone markets are on one side of the street and the component markets are on the other, and you have, like, from barbecue, you have to walk through the cell phone markets to get to the main markets. And they're very opaque. It's all in Chinese. It was really not targeted towards Westerners at all. And the main markets were starting to kind of shift over and be like a little more targeted towards Westerners. And it, like, this idea came up of like, she had walked through the markets and was like, I think maybe there might be enough parts in there that you could like build your own cell phone. And I was like, that's really interesting. And then she didn't really seem to do anything with it. She flew back home. She was there for a couple weeks. And like 9 months later, I was like, I think I want to dig into that more. Like and it was really like a one of the biggest reasons to do it was to have an excuse to go explore the cell phone markets and like figure out how they worked. And part of it was just for like street cred with the barbecue group, right? Was that like if I could figure out how these markets worked or what was going on, like I'd be the popular kid at the table, which was actually true. Like that's what happened, right? But also like it was a cool group to like experiment with the storytelling around, because I would go to the markets and I would figure out, like, I spent 5.5 months on that first video, like full-time work. because the rabbit hole just kept going deeper and deeper and deeper the further I chased it. And I would come to barbecue every night with like one little new tidbit I'd learned, and the story I would retell the story over and over to new people who were showing up in China, because it was kind of a rotating group of people. And so it was almost like being a stand-up comic and like going to the local club to like work out my material, which was fantastic. But also like, this group was a very fertile ground for new shenanigans, right? Because, and this is kind of what I wanted to start to get into as I want to keep this very loose, and I want to start telling some more stories here, and then we're going to open it up to questions. But one of the things that I think it's really important to communicate is that there's a very different paradigm in people who make stuff in the US and in the Western world than there is in China. And the big difference is that China has a really robust manufacturing ecosystem. And so being a maker in being a maker in the US is all about having all of your own tools to do everything yourself. In China, most makers don't have any of the tools. It is more about being like a conductor of other services, right? So you don't own your own CNC. You have a CNC guy on WeChat that you can send your design to, and 24 hours later, he's sending you your part for like no money, right? But one of the things that Ian and Charles and like several other people figured out is that for about $500, you can do something real with a factory. If you go visit the factory and you figure out that they're doing some process, for about $500, you can figure out a tweak to that process to do something new and interesting, that if you can explain what it is and give $500 to the factory boss, he's like totally game to try it out, right? So like Ian, one time for Hacker Camp, and he did a number of these, he like took people to factories to like show them off, and he somehow had gotten contact with an electrolytic capacitor factory, right? And electrolytic capacitors are those ones that look like little cans, right? And the can is aluminum. And so this factory had these amazing like custom-built machines for completely automatedly assembling these electrolytic capacitors. But they were getting the aluminum cans from like a stamp mill somewhere else, right? They were just stamping them out of sheet metal in a tool. And Ian's looking at him and he's going, that's raw aluminum. What if we could anodize those? So he goes to the factory boss and he was like, can you give me 5,000 cans and I will take them somewhere else and I will have them anodized and then I will bring them back. And so he went and made pink capacitors for $500 for his first run that were just gorgeous. There were some like chemistry issues because inevitably these projects turn into like the inevitable like, they always go wrong, but like in interesting ways. So the way this went wrong, well, first he took it to the anodization factory, and it turns out that some poor soul had to take these little tiny cans, and every single one had to be hung on its own individual hook. 5,000 of them, right? Because they have to be like suspended to be dipped in the various solutions. So they get them back, and I actually got to go the day that Ian was doing this, and it was like really cool to see it. They were gorgeous. But they started coming off the line, and as they were testing them, they started leaking electrolytic fluid, like they were like bubbling and stuff. And so the hypothesis was that there was like some interaction between the electrolyte and the dye. And so then, I don't know if he ever made any like further progress on it, but then the next step was to like convince the anodization factory to plug them all so that no anodization happened inside the can, which just sounded like an even more miserable task. But Ian also figured out that for very little money, there are services that will take a bag of components and put them into tape and reel so that they can be fed into a pick-and-place machine, right? It's this like plastic tape with individual wells, and then you put like this cover tape on top, and then you wind it onto a reel. And so you can get, I think there's like stock tape in various sizes you might know, but you can also like have custom wells made with like a stamping tool. So Charles, I think, went along with Ian when Ian was trying to get his capacitors reeled. And Charles was like, wait, hang on a minute. If I bring you something other than components, will you also reel that? And they were like, yeah, if it's the right size. So Charles goes down to the local convenience store, and he's like, what candy can I put in reels?
Yeah, so now there are jelly beans that you can feed into a pick and place machine. Yeah.
And breath mints.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's just this like, it was this never-ending like set of shenanigans of realizing that now making is not about doing it all yourself, but is rather in coming up with the idea, like understanding standard processes well enough that you can see the places in which they can be tweaked without like breaking things, or like only breaking them a little bit in testing them, and then convincing whoever owns the machine or whoever has the process to like try out your dumb idea. Yeah.
Yeah, there was definitely a lot of that. There was also this interesting movement that was happening. Historically, China manufacturing is relatively low margin, and so a lot of these giant factories, if you think about the Foxcons of the world and these massive, massive factories that are there, that's for people who are building goods that are sold in Walmarts and Targets and like the massive, that's still what happens. But there's this, while this was all going on, there was also these smaller factory ecosystem that was starting to build, because, you know, Chinese factory owners are also entrepreneurs. And so they were starting to realize that, wait a second, there are only so many companies in the world that are going to order things at 100,000 parts in order, but there are lots of companies that are going to want 500 or 1,000. And so at the same time that, you know, I think a lot of people in this room and at this are thinking about manufacturing at a small scale in their house or in their workshop, the same thing is happening over there. And so for these $500,
But it's not happening in houses.
Yeah,
it's happening in small factories, you know, that are very specialized usually.
But it's kind of the same thing where you, even when I first started going to China, the idea of getting 500 of something made somewhere was impossible. And now there are a lot of factories and a lot of vendors that would be very, very happy to CNC you or 3D print you 500 of something or 100 of something. And that really opens the door to not just shenanigans, but also just cool things that you don't need to go and worry about investing tons and tons of money to hit an MOQ to do it.
MOQ is minimum order quantity.
Minimum order quantity, and that's actually very empowering, because now you can do things even on a small scale, but still gain the benefit of expertise.
Yeah, absolutely. I will throw a shout out. If you are interested in that sort of thing in the 3D printer space, I am very impressed by what LDO is doing. They're here. They have a booth up front. You should definitely go talk to like Dave or Jason. They're doing really cool stuff for like kitting cool 3D printer projects that are both open source and I think not open source too, but they like really get it. So if you want to learn more about that, go talk to them. I'm blown away by what they're doing, and they are working with some very cool projects. You know, Kogo Press, Positron. They used to supply motors to Prusa. Like they are involved in many very cool projects, and really get it and like get us as a community, but also really have deep ties in China and understand how that ecosystem works and can like bridge the gap. What was I going to say? Oh, I was going to say like the thing about low run manufacturing, like we talk about like low volume, high mix is kind of what Greg's talking about. So like a lot of different things in low volumes, is that by and large it's DIY manufacturing in that, and this is kind of how I met Greg, is like if you work with like a Foxconn, you are more likely to get kind of like turnkey experience where you like throw your design over the wall and get back what you want. But like that doesn't even work with Foxconn, right? The reality is like there are very few things that are hands-off in terms of manufacturing. Like circuit boards are one. Like you can, at this point, you can just submit a design, you get back your finished boards, they're usually right. That is not true with like final assembly of a product. Really, my understanding, and you're welcome to add more to this or disagree, is that like you talk with a factory, you build a relationship, and then really you should fly over there for your first production run, because the expectation is that like the factory provides the equipment and the workers, and you are expected to sort of train everybody to make your product the way you want it. right? They understand like standard manufacturing processes, like, you know, making circuit boards and doing injection molding. But like, if you want your product done the way you want it done, you're expected to like, there's very much this attitude of like, my factory is your factory, right? Like, even factories I'm just visiting, like, it is totally fine to walk around and like pick stuff up and put it down and stick your head inside machines, and like, you're responsible for your own safety in their environment, and they kind of just trust that you're not going to be a jerk and like mess anything up. And then once you get into manufacturing, like, it's your responsibility to like help define the manufacturing process for assembly of your product, like define how it's going to be tested, define what criteria you have for like how many scratches can it have before it's a reject, like all of those things, which leads to this like very close relationship with your manufacturer.
Yeah, and I will add, like, if you're thinking about manufacturing, not just in China, but anywhere, you have to go, get on an airplane, do the thing, build personal relationships. This is the other one, is that a lot of the factory owners, the places that build stuff for us, like, I'm genuinely friends with these people. They want to make good product. They just need direction, and a lot of times they don't understand. The second part about going, which is, I think, you know, an extension of Lamb Place and everything else, is when you go, you will learn more things. I'm designed for manufacturing. Yes. I always have this kind of weird thinking about 3D printing in general, because my brain thinks about things in the context of injection molding and like really mass manufacturing processes. And there's a lot of like, oh yeah, well, I'm going to design it for 3D printing, which is impossible to do injection molding, which is both amazing but also breaks my brain just a little tiny bit. But when you go and you start seeing these processes and you walk around these factories, you say, oh, wait a second. Oh, I didn't know you could do that. Or how would you do that? This is the old traditional machinist versus mechanical engineer thing that happens, where machinist thinks that all mechanical engineers are stupid, and a lot of times they're correct. Just because we can make something in CAD doesn't mean you can actually manufacture it. And you can use the vendors in Asia for that exact same thing. I mean, even at the scale that Rev is now, we still regularly will send to some of our key vendors like, hey, we're working on this thing. Here's the kind of 80% of what we're trying to do. We think we could go this way or this way. What do you think? And then we'll learn like, oh, well, if we change this radius or we pick this different material or we do this, that could be more cost effective or faster to make, or you gain all these benefits because the value is the actual expertise. And actually, that's one of the reasons that's actually more prevalent about manufacturing in China than other things, is that there's just expertise there that we don't have in other places. I think I'm going to avoid going into the manufacturing in China versus other places in the world conversation here, but there is just more general knowledge. If in the United States you could get everybody who knew how to design an injection mold together and we could fill like maybe a convention center. If you got everybody who knew how to design an injection mold in China, you could fill like football stadiums of
probably
people.
Multiple.
It's just an order of magnitude of just the depth of knowledge. And you could use that to your advantage, whether that's for weird side projects or
actual
or real
companies
stuff.
And making real money. Yeah. I think the other thing too is like listen to the people you're working with, right? Like I've heard people be frustrated, particularly with like circuit board manufacturers, like they changed my design, like they screwed everything up. And sometimes that's true. Like the engineer didn't understand, at the factory didn't understand what you were trying to do. But like a lot of times, like it's all like well-intentioned. It's rarely to like for them to save costs or something like that. It's always like trying to make your design as manufacturable as possible and like make it come out as well as possible. And I think for circuit boards, that's like relatively. They don't make a lot of huge changes, but like in other things, you really will save a lot of money if you let them feedback into the design process to make it something that's easier, cheaper, more reliable to manufacture.
There's also a part of this that I believe that good ideas come from anywhere, and so when your factories understand what you're actually doing, sometimes they'll come to you and be like, "Hey, I know you're doing this thing. Have you ever considered this other thing?" And I'm humble enough. I don't care that the idea comes from us if it's a great idea. So I think that when you're using outside parties, like getting them more engaged with what you're doing gives you a road to success.
And treating them as partners rather than just a service where like, I always use the like throwing stuff over the wall analogy, right? Like I mean, part of the culture of like manufacturing in China is like you go and meet your manufacturer, and then they take you out for like a fancy dinner or a fancy lunch or whatever, which is always hilarious because like there's all sorts of weird cultural like.
Don't ask what you're eating, just eat
Yeah.
it, and it's polite.
And there's a lot of like very funny like stereotypes they have of us, which is like everybody eats with chopsticks, but then like they will ask like, do you know how to use chopsticks? Like, do you need a fork? And Greg actually just had one of his vendors come visit him in the U.S. for the first time.
Yeah, so one of our vendors was here for like 10 days doing a tour, and I kind of felt like it was the opposite experience that I've normally have, where I go to a vendor, in a van, you take them to lunch. So we did the same thing opposite, and so I made the joke. I was like, can I get you chopsticks at this barbecue place in Texas? It was all...
Hold your hand further up. I think you're blocking the antenna.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So I was like, sorry, chopsticks. It was kind of the same joke the other way around. All in good fun. I promise you. But it's a.
They tried mac and cheese for the first time.
Yeah, mac and cheese was
Absolutely loved it.
was an amazing experience.
Yeah.
Love mac and cheese.
You asked them what they wanted to drink, and they were like, had no idea what the options would be at a barbecue place.
Yeah.
Had never used a fountain drink
Like
machine.
a fountain soda drink doesn't exist, right? At
It's
least
always just filled for you by someone. I don't even really know where it comes from. I know I can get a Coke. Well, it's usually in a can, I guess.
It's in a can. Yeah.
Yeah. They don't really have fountain drinks. I guess McDonald's maybe does, but yeah.
So anyway, it's all good fun there.
Yeah, and they appreciated all of the jokes that you were making in reverse. Like understood and appreciated them. So
Flipping just to a fun
Yeah.
side story. One of the things that you do when you go to factories in China is they always want you to take a photo.
Oh, yeah.
In front of their logo, and it's literally, this is a thing. And so when I was
well, and half the time once you do that, you end up on their website.
well, that's where I was.
Oh, okay.
That's
Sorry,
where I was going with that, Scotty.
Sorry.
Is that there becomes a fun thing where you're bored and you're just like, oh, I want to go check out this factory, and then you realize that you end up in photos on Alibaba pages and on.
Yes.
Their thing, and it's like, oh, here, these are our Western customers, and it's just like the wall of people taking awkward photos in front of their thing.
But even if you are not a customer, you end up in the wall of customers. Like I have gone to a lot of factories that I have never paid any money, and I am definitely one of the customers in the list.
Yeah. So then it became a thing where anytime I went to a factory, I would make sure to get the copy of the photo, and it would be like, how many factory photos can I be on?
Yeah. So what happened when they came to Texas?
So of course I made them take the photo in front of our logo in our lobby. So I'm going to put that on our wall. Be like, oh, look, these are our vendors.
Our Chinese vendors. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I wanted to. We've been talking for a while. I wanted to open it up to questions. We have tons of stories. We could talk for hours, but I wanted to open it up to questions. And yeah. Aaron in the back. Yeah. 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 So let me just. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So the question, just so everybody can hear on the stream and everything, is Aaron saying like he works with a lot of Chinese vendors, and he's found the language barrier to be a big issue, which is absolutely legitimate. And he's found that using like as few words as possible to describe what he wants is effective. And like, do we have any other tips? And like, it's something we deal with all the time. And I would say like it is a major hurdle for operating in China, and it particularly was when I started going there in 2016, and I imagine it was like even worse when you first started 10 years before that. But I speaking for myself, like, yes, so few words is good, but I would say it's sort of tip of the iceberg, right? Like, in theory, everybody in China takes English in high school. That is about the equivalent of like everybody takes a language in high school here, right? Like, they in theory have like wrote a bunch of English. In practice, they don't speak it fluently, right? It is very rare to come across someone in like everyday life on the street that speaks any English or is willing to speak any English with you. They might understand more than they let on, but like Mandarin is the language of the land. But what's interesting is a lot of people Mandarin isn't even in their first language. There are like 43 different languages spoken in China that are like, some are dialects, but they're not mutually intelligible, right? Even in Shenzhen, like Shenzhen technically is Cantonese speaking, but because so many people have come to Shenzhen from everywhere else, it's kind of like the Bay Area. Like everybody goes there to seek their fortune. It's like one of the big technology hubs, right? Like people are from all over. So I've run into issues where like I have kind of learned like survival level Mandarin. Like I can get through everyday life in China in Mandarin. I am not having conversations with people. I am saying like, want that, but I can like bargain with them and I can get around in taxi and like do the thing at the restaurant. I read a tiny bit, like a few hundred characters. So like one of the things that kind of dovetailing off of what Aaron said is that it's about simplifying your language, right? It is about speaking like simple sentence structure, simple words, trying different ways to communicate the same thing. The advent of like smartphones and Google Translate and now AI translation is like hugely helpful. There are tools like WeChat. Everybody lives on WeChat. It's both like everybody's communication mechanism, both for work and personal life, which is very weird because you see like pictures of people's kids on WeChat that like you met in the market and buy capacitors from, which is like very odd. But WeChat has like built-in translation so that you can just, like I will go to people's booths sometimes and like add them as a WeChat friend, and then we will just text back and forth standing right there because we're getting automatic translation on the text messages. But yeah, how have you navigated it? Like you speak less Mandarin than I do.
Yes, I definitely speak less. And I like how he humble bragged. He's like, oh, I can read a couple hundred characters. I'm like, come on, I can't even. It's like I'm like 12
I've been
characters.
studying recently.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple things. I will say at the scale that we are now, I actually have some people who speak Mandarin who work for us, which is nice. I have some vendors in Asia who I use as in-betweens who are both very fluent in English and also Mandarin. But one of the things I actually point out from email, and I've been doing this for a very long time and it works, is I always will do my own translation using Google Translate and then translate back. So write an email with your context, drop that into Google Translate, translate it to simplified Chinese, then copy the simplified Chinese and translate it back to English and see if the message holds. Because there are a lot of words that mean, they're almost like homonyms, but it's different meanings when it crosses the translation. And so if you can get past the here's my email, translate it back, and it still means the same thing, most likely whatever translator they will throw it through will actually will work. And so that's a great strategy. That's a tip that I use. But yeah. I mean, early on, I mean, when I first went, it was before smartphones, and so like we're getting in that realm. We would hire translators. We would have people that would go with us. I mean, but if you didn't have one of those, you were just doing a lot of pointing, right? Yeah. I mean, one of the first things I used to do, and they actually print these on hotel cards now, but I used to have the hotel when I would check in, write me a little card saying, take me back to this hotel, because I wasn't really sure where I would end up through the day. But I know that I could get into a taxi regardless of how much it was going to cost me. And I could point to this card and just pray for the best. And I would end up back at the hotel. And there were only a couple scary moments there.
There's nothing scarier than having your cell phone run out of battery in China, because now you are just like, if you don't speak Mandarin, you are epically screwed. Yeah, Pooch. Oh, we got a third mic. Fancy.
Okay, here we go. So I've noticed when I work with vendors in the U.S., we almost have a default expectation sometimes of like, if I'm asking for something that's kind of new that I don't have a lot of experience having it molded, machined, whatever it is, that we almost expect that they'll give us a little guidance in terms of like, oh, you'd be better off if you did this, or what, maybe if you looked at this. My experience when I try this in China is that you do not get that. They expect a lot of specification and direction, and if you do that, they can hit it.
Yep.
But they are not very good at guiding it. Can you give me some insight on that?
Well, so part of that is you need to explicitly ask for that feedback, right? I think that's try to avoid making overly generalizations about culture, and I can only speak to my experience. But there is a little bit of a pride thing about, oh, I gave you this thing and I fully understand it, and I'm just going to work off of that to go back. And I think that that's where some of that bridge of things not going right happens.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
for most of the vendors that I work with, this is one of the first conversations I have when I'm working on bringing on a new vendor is, I want to work collaboratively with you. When I send you something, I want your engineers to give me feedback. I mean, if you don't get any feedback, if there's not a, hey, you know, have you thought about changing this? Or do you really need 4 digits of precision on this tolerance? If they don't come back to me with questions, I don't actually believe that they've understood what I'm trying to do. And so functionally, a lot of that is setting the table to say, I want to have this conversation. I will not be offended if you ask me questions about my design, because I don't like I said, I don't know exactly what all that is psychologically, but there is oh, well, obviously this is your expertise. You know what you're doing. Right. And so I'm just going to do exactly what you told me to do. And I think that just setting that understanding up front will do a lot of good.
Okay.
Yeah, awesome. Let's go to the Hawaiian shirt.
So we've talked a lot about manufacturing in China.
Sure.
You mentioned a lot about like the ethos of, you know, my factory is your factory.
Yeah.
What is one lesson that we as makers in the United States, especially those of us who are looking to turn this into a career, what are some lessons that we can learn from China?
Oh, there's so many. That's a big question. Okay, I will give you one, which is, and it took me a while to learn this in China, but I think as makers, we look at what's available around us to solve the problems that we have. And we just kind of grab from what's on the shelf and what tools we have and whatnot. And we end up using things in ways they weren't intended, which is like totally the hacker's ethos. And like, I'm totally on board with that. That is not how manufacturing works. There is a set of standard manufacturing processes that all products are made from, generally speaking. And as soon as you get outside of that standard set of manufacturing processes, you are on your own, and stuff gets really weird and hard and expensive. You are best off, like, one of the most important things is to understand what are well-established, well-understood manufacturing processes that things can be slotted into, right? So, like, all electronics are PCB, PCBA, injection molding, or CNC milling, or aluminum extrusion. Like, there's a couple options there, you know, and, you know, there's a standard way of testing boards. There's a standard way of programming boards. Like, if you can fit into that, you're in really good shape. And as long as, and like, the closer to the middle of the road of each of those you stay, the better off you are. When you start getting like far on the fringe, like, that's when things go terribly wrong. And so I think one of the biggest things that I see when makers and hackers from the US come to China with the goal of making a project is that they expect, like, they only know what they've experienced, and they spend a lot of time like continuing down the path they're already on, rather than like learning how, I'll say how China does things, and there is a reality to that, but also what I'm saying is like how manufacturing does things. And so like learning like, and actually Greg's like someone who's really good at this, right? Is like understanding, what does China already have a lot of, right? Like, it could be as simple as like wandering around the markets looking at connectors, right? Like, what connectors are just all over the place in the markets, and what are either really hard to find or not there at all? That's a really good indication of what you're gonna spend a lot of money on and what is gonna be dirt cheap, right? The same goes for manufacturing processes, like all of this stuff. And so I think like the best thing you can do is expand your horizons of like what else is out there that people are already doing, so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And then if you want to scale up manufacturing, so you're not convincing your manufacturer to do this thing they've never done before, they have no experience with, they don't have any tooling for, like da 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 da. But I'll let you probably know more than I do.
No. So I have some, I want to expand on what Scotty said a little bit. Was things about like picking components is a really good one for that. So when you go to DigiKey or Mouser, they have every size of everything that you could possibly imagine, right? So when you go and pick this LED size, you're like, oh, this fits perfectly. This is how I reflector and all this other stuff I want. And then you go try to find it, and they can find it in Asia. Like, it's easy, right?
But you are like setting yourself up for a world of hurt.
But you realize that, oh, okay, cool. I bought a 10-cent LED on DigiKey, and it worked great. And I go over to China, and I'm like, well, how come this is a 9-cent LED? Well, because that's not the package that everybody's using. And whereas you can go and be like, oh, well, if you changed from this weird package to this standard package that everybody has, you go to a fraction of a penny for that LED. And so if you want to be efficient, there's just an understanding of what's at play. I mean, McMaster does things like spoil us. We can buy every size possible bearing you can, but yeah, there's thousands of sizes of bearings on McMaster. But if you picked one of the top 100, they drop in price massively. So some of it is just kind of understanding and adapting your designs and what you're trying to do for what is out there, and I think that that's a really big thing. But philosophically, it's the other one is don't be afraid to work with people. I find that China is very collaborative, even if it seems like they work against their best interests sometimes. Yeah. Where we have some vendors who are like, they could absolutely do this, but for one reason or another, we found another vendor that can do something better or cheaper, or lead time is a big thing that I deal with, where it's like we move stuff around to get it shorter lead time. And they're happy to say, oh, well, hey, for this round, we're going to use this other vendor, and they're going to ship it to you, and they're going to do this part, or you're going to do this, and let's bring it together. And I think that a lot of times, especially in the startup world in the US, we're very like, whose startup is in stealth mode, right? Like, where this little bit more open sharing of information will go down a really good path. I mean, there's how many startups and new companies that are in the other room who have different 3D printers, and while there's really great sharing and there's a lot of open source boards and slicers and things like that, you still have people in there, 20 different people all working on the exact same problem, trying to solve the exact same thing, and because it's all kind of isolated. And so factories share knowledge, people share knowledge at barbecue and places like this. And so as much as you can share, that will also help us as well. And I think that we can embrace kind of a more openly working together on stuff too.
I think to piggyback on that also, like, don't assume that you have to do everything yourself, right? Like, China is very, particularly really all the way up and down kind of the size of factories, there's a lot of specialization, right? There's a lot of little shops that just do one thing. And I think in the US, particularly when people like bootstrap manufacturing from nothing, they assume they have to do all of the processes themselves. And I think that's like a real like tar pit for the maker community turning into manufacturers. Like, you are much better off trying to figure out what can you get somebody else to do, and working deals with, don't like assume that they're going to be too much money for you to afford. Like, go and talk to them and explain your vision. Like, sometimes people will be willing to like cut you a deal on your first manufacturing run, your first batch of 100, because they know that they see the vision and they see that you're going to grow and that your business with them will grow over time. The other thing that I would say, sort of piggybacking on like popularity of components, is we are like that little like sucker fish on the side of a whale shark, right? Like, let's take LED strips, which I think of as like the quintessential like maker product, right? LED strips don't exist for us, right? Nobody's making LED strips for us. That is like, there is an entire area of Shenzhen that just does LEDs and LED strips. It is for architecture, right? It is for big light up animated buildings and displays and things like that. We just happen to have found something that works for us that they are making in so large quantities you can't even imagine, right? There are a bunch of other things like that. Like, we have now access to very, very cheap, very, very small IMUs, accelerometers, gyroscopes, compasses. That's because smartphones need them. We have access to very small, cheap cameras. That's because smartphones need them. Like, there's a whole list of things that I could talk about with smartphones. But like, look around you and see what industry is doing that you can piggyback on. And you can't get access to all of it, but like, also, a lot of it ends up sort of trickling down and getting copied and whatever, and you can get access to that. And that, like, being aware of where the industry is headed and what they're doing and what is already being made in bulk that you can, like, use for your own purposes will keep you in the land of cheap things that make you happy.
Before we move on to another question, I'm going to take a point of privilege as the microphone holder and ask you to show off your backpack.
Oh, nice. I saw these all over the markets the last time I was there. And Katie, who's my partner, is pointing that out because I was supposed to bring her back one, and I didn't have time. And I'm really sorry.
That just means you get to go back to China soon.
I know.
This is true.
I know. Maybe in June.
Next question. Go right here. Since you're right here.
I also noticed we are at 2:45. Do we have to stop now? Okay. No from the back. So we'll keep going.
I'm curious what your thoughts are on the large amount of disregard in like patent law as well as IP law that happens in China and how that impacts innovation. And for context, I actually have an example with me. It's a 16-bit emulator that has got thousands of ROMs straight from China. It was $13.
Yeah.
Incredibly cheap. I would think if Nintendo made these, they'd be selling them like pancakes.
Yep. Okay, so this is a big question, but it's also a sticky one. And like, this is being live streamed and recorded. And I will just say for everybody who's in this room, my fear in talking about sort of controversial topics is that at some point I will be standing in front of an immigration officer on my way into China, and he will search my name and come up with the wrong video with the wrong comments on it, and that's a huge problem. And actually, like, I will say this, and this is also controversial, we are very careful how we moderate the comments on the Strange Parts YouTube channel for my physical safety. It does not mean I agree with one thing or the other, but I have to be very careful about what I say publicly. I think Greg also has reasons to be careful.
Yeah.
That being said, I do want to answer this question. So, and I'm going to try and do it as neutrally as possible because I'm going to encourage all of you to put your pre-assumptions on hold for a minute because there are two sides to this, and I don't think we all realize how sort of indoctrinated into one we are. And indoctrinated is a strong word, but like how much we are like embedded in one mindset versus the other. So, and this is true for a bunch of things in China. But it makes these topics very hard to talk about. So I would say that there are two approaches to intellectual property in the East versus the West, like China versus the West. We are very much used to the value of the design and the idea. We place a lot of value in that, and we have a lot of legal frameworks around that. And we have a bunch of reasons that we can use to defend that, right? So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that. I'm going to talk about the other mindset. The other mindset in China, as I best understand it, is China values production, right? They are a manufacturing economy, like largely due to the fact that we have shipped them a lot of our manufacturing, right? They place a lot of value on not coming up with the next idea. They actually don't care. Most factory bosses do not care what they are manufacturing. They just want to be manufacturing something. And for the longest time, it was all about contract manufacturing. It was a customer coming from the West, giving them something to manufacture, and then they would make that thing according to the customer's specifications, and they would make like a fixed percentage margin on top of that. And so their goal, they have a bunch of fixed overhead, right? They are paying employees, they are housing those employees, they are feeding those employees. By the way, like that's not because the factory requires it, it's because the workers won't work there unless you provide food and housing, right? They want to save as much money as possible when they're in Shenzhen working because they want to go home to their families, right? So, and if you don't give them overtime, they'll quit because they want to make as much money as possible, right? So there's a bunch of like assumptions there, right? But the factory boss is paying rent, he's paying all this overhead for employees, he's got machines, It's very expensive to run a factory. So his biggest goal is making things 100% of the time, right? And there's not a lot of thought about what you're making. It's just like whatever comes in the door, right? So then one of the questions is like, well, what do you do if you don't have a customer? What do you do if things are slow, right? Now you want to look around and be like, well, what can I make that I know I can sell, right? Again, there's just like all of the value is placed on the manufacturing process and just like turning raw materials into finished goods, right? Doesn't matter what, right? So it's how we get weird things like, well, fidget spinners.
Fidget spinners, yeah.
Is a good example, and we have a lot of stories about. We were both in China during this fidget spinner boom. I went to the first and last international fidget spinner trade show, which was like 80 people in a co-working space with folding tables displaying like bearings and.
And if you nag Scotty on his Discord channel, he'll eventually put this video out.
I have some video that I have never released from the world's first international fidget spinner trade show.
We could have talked about fidget spinners for this entire session because there are
maybe we
so
should do
many
that next time.
amazing stories.
That would
about
be a
fidget
45-minute
spinners.
talk.
Yeah, we would, and we have videos and photos and all sorts of stuff.
It was
like that.
amazing. It was really a kind of a remarkable thing. But it's also how you like end up with like knockoff Arduinos and things like that. It's literally just like people filling the factory line. I will also say like. There's just not this like attachment to the idea, right? Like ideas are very cheap and free in terms of how China looks at it. The most important thing, so they also get frustrated about the fact that they don't have like patent law and IP restriction. They get like, I hear from people all the time like, oh, like we just came out with this new product and then our competitor ripped us off, right? But the way they solve that is not legally. The way they solve that is by like beating them in terms of speed, right? So it encourages the entire industry to just move faster, which is a huge like core Chinese value in general, right? Is like speed trumps everything. Whereas I would say we like have far more of a culture around like quality trumps everything. And we place a lot of value on like the design and engineering process. I would also say like it's not just patent law, it's like trademark and stuff too. Like it is wild to see what the Chinese do with various trademarks and brands and logos. Like it is fair game, and I have seen the wildest mashups of like high-end brands with, you know, Winnie the Pooh and Nike and like just crazy mashups of stuff. But like I look at the two various systems and I kind of go, I've been immersed in the Chinese system long enough and I've seen how that like, you can't relax as a Chinese manufacturer. You must always be thinking of the next thing and be trying to get like units out to beat your competitive market and then have the next thing coming after it. And I kind of think that's better. Like it leads to a faster pace of innovation. And I think, like, I kind of think patents, Craig might disagree with this, but I kind of think patents suck. Like, I come out of the software world, and, like, software patents definitely suck. But I also just think, like, it can lead, like, with how long patents last, I think it can lead to stagnation in industries that would move much faster if they weren't, like, limited by patents. But to conclude here, and I want you to jump in, because I know you have different opinions, but I think the biggest problem is that the two systems don't mix. It's like oil and water. So if we all did it the Western way, it would work great. If we all did it the Chinese way, it would work great. It's a huge mindset shift, but trying to have both exist on the same planet is like a real problem. And both sides don't understand the other side and get very frustrated. And so I think that's really the root of it, is like, there's not one that's better or worse, right? At the end of the day, they both work. It's that it doesn't translate at all.
I have so many things to say to disagree with Scotty on
Yeah,
this
go
one.
for it.
I have over 80 patents to my name. And I have more pending. And so I file patents because it's a way to hold some ownership for the R&D investment on new ideas. And it's difficult, especially as a small company. I mean, Rev, we're a 50-person company. We can work on a product in a relatively small market and work on something for a year and a half and 2 years, but the end product itself actually is very simple. The ideas to get to the end product were very, like what it took to get there was very hard, even if the end result was very oh my God, that makes total sense. So I like patent protection for that reason. I'm going to be very careful here because there are some things going on in my universe right now about patents. But talking specifically about China, first of all, in many, many cases, if you protect yourself, if you actively want to protect your IP in China, China will actually respect your IP.
Yeah, this is I agree.
And so if you go to the copy malls, right? So like right by the train station in Shenzhen, there's a giant mall, and it's like all luxury brands. But you look around,
all copies of luxury brands.
copies of luxury brands, like not genuine products. But when you look around, you'll notice that you'll see some brands, but not other brands.
Yeah.
Okay? And the reason for that is some brands have gone and worked with the Chinese government and worked with their IP and registered their trademarks and their copyrights, and actually China will enforce them. And there are other brands that just said, we don't care. And the ones that don't care, then they just get copied. So it's kind of a mixed bag on that stuff.
I think you can even make an argument for why copies are good for brands, particularly in the luxury brand market. It's less about patents and more about brand names and, and
trademarks
copyrights.
and things like that.
The simple version, it's a longer conversation, but the simple version is that low quality copies are not bought by people who would buy the original. They can't afford the original.
Well, let me tell a very really quick story on this. So in Hong Kong, Canton Road, which is like Fifth Avenue in New York, or any like the crazy luxury brand. So to get to Hong Kong, you have to cross by this copy mart. And so regularly, every single weekend when I'm hanging out in Hong Kong, you see people coming from mainland China to come into Hong Kong to go shop in Hong Kong to buy the real goods and bring them back and do it. Literally, on the way to get to the real brand store, they had to pass the equivalent of a giant mall that they could get any one of those things at an eighth of the price. But people want the real thing because they value the quality and they value the thing. So that's kind of to Scotty's point, right? It's, so there's some degree of the copy or the knockoff actually helps build brand recognition.
It's aspirational participation in the brand without the ability to participate directly. And I think there can be an argument made, and I don't have data to support it, that people who participate in the brand aspirationally through copies, when they get to the point that they can afford the real thing, they do. And they pay for the real thing. Because it is, like the difference between a bad copy and the real thing is very noticeable to everyone. The danger is grade A copies. And those are almost universally
counterfeits.
Yeah, and it's a huge spectrum, right? It's not just fake and real, right? Like there's a ton of different variation.
I can share an actual legit story on this. When I used to do toys, I used to be the senior engineer on a product line called Hexbug back in the day. And so we would sell Hexbugs on Amazon, and occasionally we would get customer service. My thing didn't work, and we were like, okay, fine, ship it back. We'll ship you another one. They're toys. It's easy. And then we started getting this whole wave of them not working. And as somebody who was literally responsible for manufacturing and quality on this product line, like what the hell is going on, right? And so we started asking for them back. And what was happening was they were clones, and they were being sold as our stuff with our brand in our tubes on Amazon, right? And so because anybody can kind of go onto a listing on Amazon and sell their own version. And so we were doing customer service for replacing these people who inadvertently were buying the non-genuine goods. That is actually the thing that I am most concerned about some of the IP stuff. But there are things there. So going all the way back to your handheld game device, which, to be clear, I have one also.
Oh yeah, there is no judgment here.
Yeah.
To be clear, like I gladly participate in that ecosystem.
From a functional perspective, the factory built a really cool little Android or Linux tablet, and the software that's running on it is the thing that's violating IP. If Capcom, Nintendo, PlayStation, Sony, whoever wanted to shut that down, they could, right? They have, we can talk about the ethics of if that factory should produce that device, and there's some things there, but those companies that own the IP that's on that device are large enough scale, have law firms, can go work with China to ban the import of those devices. So this is a very, very nuanced conversation, and believe me, I have designed products that have been copied and knocked off, and it's incredibly frustrating for lots and lots of reasons, and sometimes it's been worth it to go and use the legal system to try to enforce them, and I could tell all sorts of other stories about that too, but some of them I can't, but I could tell some. But it is a nuanced conversation. If you are worried about protecting your intellectual property when you're working with Asia, there are lots of things you can do. One of the ones that I do regularly is we separate the lock from the key. So we will produce part of our product at one vendor, part of our product at another vendor, and a third vendor will actually assemble the thing together. So no one vendor has all pieces of the puzzle. That works for some things, it doesn't work for other things. But it's...
We're out of time.
Okay.
So we could talk all day. We're gonna. And I think Greg will too. Just stand in front of the stage. You're welcome to come up and ask more questions. We're happy to chat more. I'm happy to take selfies. I have stickers. Thank you for coming. And thank you, Greg, for letting me drag you up on stage on very short notice
That's
to
fine.
tell stories.
And subscribe to Electric Ranch and Strain Parts
Yes.
on YouTube.
Yes. Thank you all.
Cool, thanks. I assume there's an NFC inside
No, I
of it.
don't. I have stickers, but go to my website, like contact.
Oh, they're fidgets.
Yeah.
Oh.
So they're based after. I've got
Get some other people too.
I've got the design on printables. I call them the fidget 50s. I actually need to rename it on printables, but they're little coins just like that. And I figured I'll make my
No, this is very...
just the same way.
Except now they don't fit in people's...
Right.
things, so.
Right. But it's got my the QR code on